Hello, NB Poli Pod World, NB Poli Pod World. Sorry. I'm Brent Harris, and I'm here with Joanna Killen. You're back for another week of a bunch of political banter with us two crazies who get up and talk about this every week. We're a day late, and we'll get to that. But first, let's acknowledge that we are situated right now in this vicinity where we're doing this podcast in Mennequist in St. John, New Brunswick, on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoq, Pescatomakati. And we are coming up into a time when we are like, do we stop now for the summer break? Do we stop later? And we were supposed to have Andrea on our pod today. And we're going to disappoint you because I know we've been really jonesing for a good, intelligent conversation with a conservative, and Andrea was sure to bring that to us for sure, or for certain. No word from Dominic Carty. I mean, surprise, surprise, as our friend Cilla Black usually tells us. He showed up on the Twitter chat for a couple of weeks, and then he's just gone. Like, we've emailed him and nothing. And
we have the receipts for anyone.
Yeah, we have the chat logs. So Mr. Man, who over here says he'll debate anybody. I mean, okay, you went up against, what's his face guy who ran against what's his name? Lascaris.
Demetrius Lascaris, yeah.
Yeah, guy went to Russia, and Dominic got all angry about it and tried to play his I'm a better international diplomat than you card. I mean, cool story, but you're not here, Dominic, and I'm going to continue to talk this way until you come here, because I'm sure there's all kinds of things that you're going to say and people will agree with you on, and and you'll be like, Brent, you're a pretentious little. I don't like you and how you talk about these things or whatever. And I'm going to say similar things back, but I hope at some point we can actually get to a substance conversation about.
It's going to be so fun for me, that conversation. Wow.
You're going to be able to play like mediator and controller, because you're going to have two very like frustrated male energies at each other, and you'll get to like cut right through it and tell us shut up and get us back on track and put us on an issue that you want.
Hey, that would be very exciting as well. So
you sound excited. All right. So Andrea is unavailable this week. That's why we're coming to you a day late. But there's still a lot to talk about. So we got three things that we want to hit on, and potentially other things that we might get to as well. The three that we want to talk about, obviously, we've got another cabinet minister, MLA, who's resigned immediately. Mike Holland. That didn't happen at the last pod. Or no, it did happen at last pod. We didn't talk about it very much. Sorry.
Yes. I don't even know if it actually had happened quite.
Yeah, it was like right around then. It might have happened the same day we recorded the pod. Anyway, we'll get to that. We're going to talk about some Charlotte County news. We know who's going to be running in the stead of Andrea, who is refusing to run for the party again.
And you have ties to both.
I have ties to both. This is like, again, people don't, but like some people that don't believe me, they're like, oh, you're not from Charlotte County. It's like, I actually grew up there. I actually am related to people there, and I know people there. And God help me if I can find a way to move back there and continue to do the things that I've done in my life. And if everything else fails, there is a contingency plan somewhere in the back of my head that says you're going to pick up your tool belt, you're going to pick up your hammer, and you're going to go back home, and you're just going to build in Charlotte County. And I took you down to Second Falls recently, and so you got to see, up past Bonnie River. I mean, it's beautiful country.
It's unbelievable. And you really do appreciate, to a certain extent, that there is so much of New Brunswick to have to take care of, like these back roads that wind all the way through the countryside are the responsibility of the province. So no matter, what you may think, there is certainly a lot of work that goes into maintaining what we do have here. Yep. And it was fun going to Pete's Dairy Bar in St. George.
Yeah, you've never been there before. And I was like,
never been there.
It's like one of the most proper dairy bars in the province.
It is. Like, they got wild amounts of selection. And I always feel like such a townie, like talking to you sometimes, because it really shows that I have not gotten out of this little St. John and regional bubble enough, because there is
Yeah.
of this province. It's true.
Yeah, we went down. We played a round of golf at the Hollows. Shout out to the new owners of the St. George Golf
Yeah.
Course. There's some big vision going on there. I know that our friend of the pod, Sean Rouse, has some connections there. Relatives of, I think, his in-laws own it. Yeah, sister's brother and partner own it. Anyway, I could be getting that wrong. Apologies if I am, Sean. But we thought it was great. The place was hopping. There were people around. I ran into my kindergarten best friend's dad. Like since kindergarten, I've had a best friend down in Blacks. Went to Blacks Harbor Elementary together. Patrick Hennessy and Art. So we ran into Art Hennessy, who's been, a machinist down at the factory in Blacks since I was 5 years of age and before. And so you and I played a round of golf with Art, and it was so fun. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, so that was a cool little connection. So we are going to talk about the political connections in Charlotte County. And we're going to talk about Aaron Kennedy, who is facing off against the big blue giant and the big blue dragon, Blaine Higgs and Quispam Sis. And we want to start with two things, though. One, we have an update on our GMIST activities. And I'm going to flip that to you right after this, Joe. But I don't want to forget, and I've forgotten for 2 weeks in a row. And I am so sorry to our amazing supporters on Patreon who choose to support us monetarily. There's a bunch of you who are supporting us in spirit and in love and in vibes. And that's why we started this. I mean, I shouldn't say that's why we started it. We started it because we just like to have these chats. But that's what kept us going really early on. By month 2 and 3, when we were getting, lots of feedback from you all, it was really inspiring and really helpful to say, okay, this is stuff people want. So we're going to keep doing it. But to those of you who stepped up for the extra amount, we have Mark Brewer, Jackson Jones, our dear friend Sean Rouse, Luke Robertson, and Fred LaForge. You guys are holding down the Patreon fort. You've been there since we really opened this Patreon account a couple of months back. And honestly, like this, it really does help. We were able to put, an ad out on Facebook with some of this to kind of promote the pod a while back, and plans for more of that. We want to keep this brand going, and it is going to grow beyond us. Sean already has major claim on this podcast. He's contributed, he's engaged, he's been on this pod many times, and he's just an example of where I think this community can grow and go, and that's fun to think about. A couple more free members. You guys are showing up here and saying, hey, we want to keep in touch. We got Patrick Hennessy, we got Marcia Crossman, we got Teresa 4951. Thank you, Teresa 4941. We've got the New Brunswick Coalition for Transgender Rights. Thank you, Amanda Diggins, Lois Corbett, and Sean Daly, and Chris Doyle. You guys are showing up. You want to stay in touch, and we love that too. So I'm going to put this little banner up here for our Patreon. Boom. That's how you're going to get a hold of us if you're on Rogers. You got our email right there, nbpolypod@gmail.com. You've got our patreon.com at nbpolypod. That's how you can support us. That's how you can get a hold of us. And over to you, Joe, for our GMIST update.
Yeah, so we actually got to finally action what we had talked about. We had that whole hour-long podcast about our experience in Newfoundland and sort of a lot of the things we learned about. And I was lucky enough to be on Info AM SJ this morning with CBC to talk about, what happened last night at the Carleton Community Center. So one thing I really appreciated about some of the feedback last night about implementing some of these asset-based community development tools. And if you want to go hear a more exhaustive take on all of those, you can go back and listen to the Grossmorn episode. I won't bore you too much with a lot of those details because we did cover that extensively.
Yeah.
But we basically took what we did there in Cowhead, Newfoundland, and brought it to the Carleton Community Center. And one of the cool things that people were saying was, oh my gosh, like this got us out of the comment section on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram and wherever. Like, I'm fully realizing, and I actually deactivated my Twitter this week which may seem like, oh my gosh, that's such a faux pas move before an election. But ultimately, like that energy it takes to engage on there completely takes away from the energy it takes to go recruit people to a meeting, to plan, to execute, to get people into conversations and into rooms that actually mean something. Like the folks that try to like bait you and engage you on there are just trying to basically steal all this energy from you and make you ineffective. So I'm so done with it. And this was such a validating experience to the contrary. So we had almost 40 people there. We had new neighbors, folks who had just moved to the area. We had people who've been there for 40 plus years. We had young people as young as 8 years old. There were smaller ones, but they weren't exactly participating in, the activities. But we learned a lot from people of all ages, all backgrounds, who came together to share a meal thanks to our teammate, Cass, and facilitation work. Oh my gosh, it was so good. Beautiful meal and local strawberries. Everything was purchased on the west side from Pumpkin Patch or Olson's. So we were able to plug the leaky bucket. If any of you ABCD nerds are out there, you know what I'm talking about. To keep the money that we raised in the community itself. So we did 3 exercises. We talked about what you know, what you can teach, and what you can learn, which is a great way to understand who's who in your community. What can you offer? What do you want to learn about? Some major connections were made just with that exercise alone. You did the appreciative interviewing piece. How was that?
It was lovely. I have to say the appreciative interviewing, you know, we take these 3 exercises and they're really what we call tools in the practitioner side of ABCD. And these tools are designed to flush out the bottom level of a community. And I don't mean that as in like least important. I mean the area that's hardest to get at, the area that when we're in government, we often skip over because we're worried. We're in meetings with government, with funders, with other, you know, bureaucrats, with other departments, and we just have no choice but to take who's in that room and their perspective into consideration and struggle to get this type of information out of that grassroots level of the community, that neighbor to neighbor conversation. And so appreciative interviewing is one of those tools where you sit in a circle, and it can be done in a couple of different ways, but essentially you're passing, you know, a talking stick or whatever. And you're, you know, the questions I asked folks were, you know, what's your name? What do you do? It doesn't have to be your job, but like, what is it that you do in your life? Where do you find yourself in life? And then what is your first experience of this part of the city, this part of the community? And, you know, for us in ABCD, I think we really fell backwards into the right position, if you will. We wanted to start in a different part of the city. We weren't well received there. It wasn't encouraged by other folks who are in leadership positions there. And so we've said, okay, well, who else might be interested in this work and this effort we want to put into this? And we ended up in the Lower West Side and the Carleton community. And out of these interviews, you capture the spirit and the culture and the disposition of that community. And it was really encouraging afterwards because I took all 3 groups. We took all, you know, I think there were, and I was surprised actually, most of the people there were residents. When we were doing our invitations, I was like, oh man, there's not going to be enough residents here.
Yeah.
But 90% of them were residents.
Yeah.
So I was really encouraged by that. And you really saw that this is a place where there's history, where there's vibrancy, there's memory. It isn't lost to gentrification yet, and a bunch of people who have just moved in and don't know anything about it, but think the beaches are pretty. Like there is a couple of those there. We did have a couple of those there last night, but there was still, you know, a bunch of people with the memory and with the cultural kind of mindset of what that community was, and there's still something of it there. So.
Well, one good question they asked me this morning was like, what are some sort of simple things that came out of it that we could do? And I know one is like third space placemaking. How could you create like little recreation opportunities where you have like a vacant lot that you could pave and make it into a basketball court, just to provide more sort of micro recreational opportunities versus like, okay, because you also talked about big things. You're telling me about like a water taxi from the west side to uptown,
that
big dreams.
People were big dreaming.
Yeah, but there's also some other out of my community mapping exercise where we looked, and this was so interesting to me because, and this is an NB Poli related thing. Geographically, the community is divided at city line, which is actually a politically drawn line based on the municipalities of Carleton and Lancaster, which were dissolved in the 60s to create the larger Greater St. John area. And we've kept those. But that being said, the Lower West Side, also known as what is below city line to the water, has been now defunded of a school. There used to be 5 schools. There was 2, New Albert and St. Patrick's, that were in that particular geographical area. Those are no longer. The school is now up in the quote unquote Fundy Heights, Upper West Side area. And so it's like, no, Carleton community actually is a lot bigger now. It encompasses the school. It encompasses Olson's, the grocery store. It encompasses the 5 convenience stores that are strewn about throughout. And this was a big bone of contention with the audience because we started off the conversation being like, that is south of city line, but you don't really have a fulsome community without a school and without food access and without recreational access. So all of these little hot spots, and we got people to actually place dots on the places they frequent the most, cross those imaginary borders. And so you see this priority neighborhood that has had its school and, little groceries and gas stations and all of that sort of taken from it, if you will, like the centralization stuff we've talked about on here. You've seen that happen in a big way to this neighborhood. And they have a lot in this bottom area, but there's a lot missing in the in-between on the hill. And we talked a whole bunch about that. And it really does span into my quote unquote, like council ward, into St. John Lancaster. The Carleton community is a lot bigger than everyone thinks it is, which is what we learned from the residents last night.
Yeah. And you know what? I look at this and I think to myself, like, there are a lot of, you talk about getting out of the comment section on Facebook. And it's like, politically speaking, everybody's political. People who say, oh, I don't like politics, they just don't like the politics that they're not in control of. And when you're on Facebook and you're in the comment section and you're bitching and moaning at me, and you know who you are if you're listening to this pod, I hope you are, because I can't wait to continue to have a conversation. And I don't mean to be crass and to be, too combative here, but when you're doing that and you're with your neighbors and you're saying, we don't like this project that Brent's proposing here. And, I've mentioned it before on here, where basically a group of us in St. John got together last year to try to figure out what is a creative, fast, affordable response to housing people who are falling into homelessness. And there's a range of people, right? We're not just talking about people who live in tents. We're talking about people who are surfing couches. We're talking about people who are working full time and living in shelters. We're talking about all kinds of people. And, of course, people get wind of this in the neighborhood and the arena that we're looking at. And we've come up with a plan. We've done a feasibility study. We've got a research grant from the federal government for $1 million to pioneer and build these types of units that would be fire rated and ready to be put into stranded commercial assets like arenas. And we've got, some planning around social enterprise development and community engagement, and a soccer field being put out on the green space out back with St. John Soccer, but it's not finalized. We haven't finished it yet. So somebody got a word of it, and they're on there saying, we don't want these druggies and these addicts in our backyard. They're going to be fights in the street. Your fault, Brent. You're crazy. They're your rich donors from out of town. And I'm just like, okay, somebody poisoned the well here. None of that's true. We've not fundraised for this arena or any of it. We have fundraised for another building in partnership with John Howard, because we've kind of built this little coalition of residents who care about housing and who want to do things and get busy. And, I'm on there fighting, and I'm realizing, like, this is their politics. And, I'm trying not to be like combative. I'm trying just to be like, here's the facts, guys. And I'm right here, and you're calling me a liar, and I can't help you if you don't want to believe me, it doesn't matter what I show you. But that's a politics they feel like they're in control of. And that's this, when we talk about polarization and people who just look like their heads buried in the sand and want to vote Donald Trump, this is how you get there. How do you break that? You go to a meeting like last night, you sit beside your neighbor, you listen to a hopeful and beautiful story about your neighborhood. You realize it's not all going down the toilet. You realize there are a lot of people who care. You realize there's a lot of resources that are available right now that can do important things and make the community better. And so you got to get out of the comment section. And, it really relates, like you said, politically. You hear these people talk and you're like, my God, they are advocating for the most extreme version of democratic localism you can imagine. And like, if you're listening, it's like, if you're a political nerd, democratic localism is an absolutely like sussed out, thought out, articulated form of government where it's, instead of the federal government having this big power, it's the local government that has this big power. And by the way, this is actually in practice in certain places. Germany has a far more democratically localized field of government, far less powerful federal government. Switzerland does too, on and on. So these are real like thoughts people have. And on the one end, here they are saying, well, this neighborhood should get to own its resources, own its development, and say yes or no to whatever it wants. But at the other end of it, they're voting for parties that are like, we're going to centralize government. We're going to shut down the 2 schools in the Carleton. We're going to take the grocery store out of here. We're not going to invest in small businesses to be able to make sure this is a livable community. And now here we are in 2024, where this Carleton community has been, robbed of all of the identifying pieces that make it a community. It's 7 times the size of Black's Harbor. Just this small pocket of city line down. It doesn't have a school. It doesn't have a grocery store. It doesn't have, anywhere near what a place like Black's, maybe even Black's is severely diminished. It doesn't have a grocery store anymore. It, has a convenience store that's trying to operate like one. But it does have a school, right? It doesn't have a bank anymore. And so you're seeing it happen in rural areas too. Don't hear me wrong, but I'm just saying, like, it's a good observation you made.
You're totally right. And I think that, like, what we illustrated with our asset map, our community mapping, was that how much they miss certain parks that are not there anymore. And we know our own municipality went through a huge exercise about 15 years ago to defund and decommission a whole bunch of local small parks.
And it was called right sizing St. John's playgrounds and parks, right? That's what it was called. And
we hear about it all of the time. And it's a major thing. And that's where that whole idea of like, okay, we have a little corner of pavement, let's put a basketball net on it, because at least those kids can go and shoot some hoops for an hour or two. Because even I think it was one of the people from the center were saying, like, if this neighborhood, it's an incredibly steep climb to the middle school and to the elementary school for these kids. And they're worried about their safety in the winter. They're worried about, like, it's a big truck route down to the ferry, the whole thing. And so all these like things that they, like you say, it's political, them being there and talking about things they miss and things they want to see, while also recognizing what there still is. But, the Carleton has this big, beautiful park at the bottom of a big hill. And so the idea that maybe we didn't need to decommission all of these smaller pockets of recreational opportunities. I know in Spain, they have this concept where you play along the way. And so if you're, say, marching up to the elementary school to get your, say, 5-year-old and you have a toddler in tow, you leave like an hour before, and then there's stops along the way for you to be able to let them kind of get some of that energy out. And we really devoided our community of that opportunity by taking away these smaller pockets. So it's like
we sterilized it for people and made it accessible for cars.
Yeah, and just the whole centralization thing, that we don't need to pay for 5 parks, we only need to pay for 1.
That's right. Because we have we now have the same amount of playgrounds and parks per capita as every other city, and that makes us right-sized.
It's very on paper concept versus in practice concept.
And only, and this is, I think, our turning point. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to pick up on that, only people who are in positions of privilege to not need that type of service and community are making those decisions. And this gives us some leadway into this next conversation.
I know exactly where you're going with it.
Why don't you take us there then?
Diversity in candidates for the Liberals.
I'm going to keep yelling about it because they just elected another 50-plus white dude with money to run. And I'm just over here like, your party doesn't look anything like anything in this province anymore. Like, it doesn't look like even a similar representation of the province, not even close. It's going to have the lowest gender parity of women to men, probably since Sean Graham.
But even like women and men both with children under the age of 20.
They're going to have nobody with kids. Like, okay, they got a young kid like David Hickey, who doesn't have any kids.
The leader Susan Holt has kids.
Yes,
but
if
I'm thinking about many of the others, I don't like. There's probably a handful that would have like kids that are our kids' age.
Yes, like they don't have a lot of candidates our age. Never mind. So it's gender skewed, it's age skewed, it's wealth skewed, and we're sitting here telling you the listener, like, do you think maybe this is the proposition? I'll leave it here. I've been on this bandwagon for a few weeks now. And Sean, I know you're listening and you hate this. You're going to come back and you're going to have a chance to poke me in the eye and call me a little for sure. Because I know, Sean, you're on and you're doing a great job at calling out major details and fault lines with the progressive conservatives and making sure people know about it. And, pointing to liberal opportunities to overthrow that. I get it. This is important stuff across the board. But my goodness, do you think maybe there is a correlation between the fact that we have one of the most unpopular premiers in this province's, history, who's lost probably the most MLAs heading into an election that we've ever lost, short of Richard Hadfield, that, continues to poll and the province continues to think, in our polling that we're, some of the worst, doing the worst at certain items. And Sean, you pointed that out before here too. Like, do you think maybe there's any, and now you have this liberal alternative, this younger, first-time female leader of a competing party. No shade to our NDP. Representation where there was a party leader in Elizabeth Weir for a decade in government. No shade at all, but we have somebody who could be the premier. And do you think there's any correlation between the fact that they aren't getting traction and this issue? I'm suggesting there is. Right now, I get it. There's a national drag on the liberal brand. And there's not a whole lot of delineation happening from the liberal communications. It's all, this is why you should hate Higgs. This is why you should vote for us. This is why you should hate Higgs. This is why you should vote for us. It's not, this is how we're different than Justin Trudeau. These are the philosophical fault lines that are different. Here's how we're going to do politics different, blah, blah, blah. There's none of that. And they are not surging anywhere. Like, they're stagnant. Like, I just read Eric Renier's most recent writ. And, they're predicted to get 24 seats. The PC is predicted to get 22 and the Greens 3. Like, this is a change cycle with one of the most unpopular premiers. And this is where we're at 3 months before the election. It's a little bit crazy.
Well, we watched the episode of John Oliver, the most recent one, about how the most bland, boring leader of the Labour Party in the UK is set to absolutely obliterate the Conservatives over there. And yes, it's been 14 years, 100%, a lot longer than the Higgs reign.
And they've really they've put Britain into the toilet.
Yeah.
But yes, to your point.
Yes, they have. And they really, but who wouldn't argue that the Conservatives here haven't done the same thing and that we would see a similar surge in popularity of, our alternative.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, oh, geez, why isn't this the same as the UK, who is hella sick of their NHS being defunded, education in the tank, like inflation, cost of living, all the similar things that we're talking about here that our, provincial government has control over. And we are seeing the change cycle with the federal liberals. They're tanking. The Conservatives federally are surging. So what are the liberals missing here in New Brunswick, right? Like, there's all these other examples.
They're missing the people. This is what I'm saying is You know, as good as they may be and well-intentioned, you don't get the people by putting candidates in front of them that don't look like their neighbors, that don't sound like their neighbors, that don't have houses like their neighbors, that haven't lived lives like their neighbors.
Yeah. And I think that the fact of it is that the reason the Greens are attracting so many folks that are diverse, that do have this, you know, different background, different perspective on things, is because of the way the party is. I just don't think that the Liberals have shown anybody that they are different enough. And now there's this like Susan's change tour. And it's like, well, is it a change tour? Like, are we going to be changing that much?
Yeah,
I got into it. Going to be.
I got it. Like the MB Polypod on Twitter got into a fight with a couple of like people who used to listen. Maybe they don't anymore. But Don Darling and Kelly Lawson and Sean and stuff on there about, you know, this conservative ad highlighting Bruce Northrup as a conservative versus Bruce Northrup as a liberal, and how he's just flip-flopping like a fish out of water. And I said, look, this is kind of what we mean. This is what we meant when we said, you know, two wings on the same bird. It's nothing for someone like Bruce to go from running for the Conservatives to Liberals, because they ain't that different. And I got a lot of opposition. And, you know, Don Darling on there, former mayor of St. John, certainly big-time Liberal supporter here, big-time Brian Gallant supporter. And, you know, we have our own history with Don, which we won't go into. But the reality here is, you know, he holds this up and he says, you know, all that matters is outcomes and what does success look like. And, you know, candidates should have to go through a rigorous, you know, interview process, and leadership matters. And it's like, you know what? Policy matters, because you can only do what you're measuring, right? If you don't measure it, you can't work toward it. And policy statements and positions are a main way that you can tell an intelligent population, which we all are, even though not all of us know everything about government. We're all intelligent enough to know that the role of government is to set direction. And right now, and this is the point I made, is like, you're not grabbing people that look like the ordinary New Brunswicker to your party, because you're not putting out sort of positions that the ordinary New Brunswicker needs you to put out. Saying that you're going to make our housing, our rentalsmen look like Nova Scotia and our rent cap look like Nova Scotia and do better on everything than Blaine Higgs did isn't the same as saying, here is where we were going. Here is now the direction we are going with this policy position. You don't have to, you know, go on at length with a huge treaty like Jeremy Corbyn did for the Labour when they lost last time to the Conservatives in England. You don't have to do it like that, but you should put something out. And so you're right, like this change bandwagon trip that's happening, maybe it'll pay off. Maybe something will come out of it. I don't know, but it's not happening.
Show me an election in the last, let's say, 30 years of those two wings of the same bird where that has not been the banner. Show me one.
Change.
Show me one. There isn't one, because every single time, I'm pretty sure it was like Blaine's change bus last time.
Yes,
like, so I'm just, again, I'm so tired of this politics as usual thing in New Brunswick. And I have a slight glimmer of hope that it could be actually different this time, but it's only going to be different this time if there's another party. I'm sorry. And I know that's incredibly partisan of me.
Yeah.
But even my own mother, who is like, you know, she's pretty well versed. I'll give Marianne that, but she would never sit and listen to this podcast because it would just be she laughs. It's just too, oh my God. So, but we both love the show Borgen, and we talk about it all the time because it's with Danish Parliament, and it's how there's all these parties and they have to get together on issues. They don't just get to be the ruling party. They have, even if you are the majority or you have the prime minister's seat, you do not get a friggin' get out of jail free card for everything you want to do. And we know for a fact that Brian Gallant's government was very similar to Higgs's government. You had to run everything up through the PMO's office.
Highly centralized. And Susan was in that office. And so I will say this, though. If the Greens want to be serious, so for those of you who think this is now just a Green podcast, listen, give me a minute here. If the Greens wanted to seriously be a contender, they'd borrow $500,000 from the nearest bank that would lend to them. They would make the case to any lender they could. They put the party into debt. They run the proper ads. They'd show that we're the party of the future. They'd resource the candidates properly, and they would really show that they're willing to contend and put it all on the line. Now, that party has a policy about debt. People think Greens are just spendthrifts, crazy progressives that want to, hug trees and burn the plant and burn, corporations down. Well, there's definitely some people in that party that are like that. Don't get me wrong. But this is a policy I just think is going to hold us back from seeing what they could actually do. I ran a campaign in 2020 with $1,200 in the bank, right? It's like, and the vote share, like if you look at like efficiency of vote, Jesus, we did great, but like we didn't win. And we're not going to see.
Yeah, we don't have paid door knockers, that's for sure. And I know neither do the Liberals, but the Conservatives are hiring people to go knock on doors, and that is because they are willing to go on cross-country tours. They're willing to raise as much money as they can, and they know that the electorate is not engaged enough to know the difference. Yeah. So
I think based on the last fundraising numbers, the Liberals probably have $500,000 right now to play with for this upcoming election. And the Greens probably have about $180,000 to $200,000 to play with. Outside this is like their operations and everything else is staff. That's all paid to, and this is just money that they can work around, and actually maybe a little less than that across those 49 ridings. If the Greens don't spend $350,000 to $400,000 on a focused effort around 12 ridings, we're not going to see that breakthrough. The Liberals, right, are in a similar boat, right, where if they don't, and they needed to spend the money now to show that they're the party that looks like New Brunswickers, that has New Brunswickers that are, average people. It don't have to be like uneducated people, but they have to look like the rest of New Brunswick to get in front and to have the language of your neighbor. And they didn't do that. And I think they're paying the price for that now. And I don't think putting any more ads about how bad Higgs is going to get them there. I mean, maybe we'll have to see, but we got to move on to Mike Holland.
Yes. Wow. Somebody who maybe wants a nice summer off from all this insanity.
What do you think drove that? Because he had said he wasn't going to run again, but he would stay on until the end of the term. What do you think changed?
There's the joke going around is like, when does he start his Irving job? But it is one of these things where I think that once that news is out there in such a small province, I'm sure opportunity came knocking. So I'll be interested to see sort of where Mr. Holland ends up, where all of them end up, really, because there is nothing like inside government experience when it comes to government relations jobs, lobbying, all sorts of different things that are pretty, significant moneymakers. We've talked about it on here before, how every former premier seems to fall, ass backwards into some phenomenal opportunity. Yeah. So, same can be said about MLAs. And with this ship sinking as it is, it's like, okay, what is that rats fleeing the ship thing analogy, where you're just like, okay, I'm not going to stick around for this demise, even though that they weren't running again. It's not exactly a celebratory end for this current government.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. No, I mean, this guy has a platform that the Conservatives needed to hold. You talked about guys with guns and ATVs and lift kits in their truck, and who read those magazines about wildlife. Like Mike Holland was a star on that front, right? I remember we were in FCM and talking to somebody in the finance office in Halifax, in the municipal government, and we were like, "Oh yeah, I know I know a couple of politicians in New Brunswick," and we were like, "Oh yeah, who's that?" Because we had the podcast and we were talking, or I was talking to him. I can't remember if you were there. And anyway, he said, "Oh yeah, I know Mike Holland. I see him in all the magazines and outdoors and stuff." And so the guy's got chops on that front, and he had a profile on that front. He had a platform, and now it's gone. And like you look at Andrea, and we're going to talk about Charlotte County. Andrea had a similar platform as somebody who was willing to speak truth to power, who was, somebody who had a legal background but wasn't just like an average lawyer. And was somebody from down home and didn't parachute into the
she like married
riding.
my sister.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
everyone
it's
knows
like,
her.
yeah. And now she's gone. So what happens here? It's not, I don't think it's 22 seats like Eric Renier's prediction goes. They may have kind of a resting state in the polls, but I find it hard to believe that people who voted for Mike Holland are now going to vote for whoever replaces him after these two big announcements. Hey, I'm not going to run again, but I'll stay on. Oh, never mind. I can't stay on with these guys. They're crazy. Bye. I'm leaving right now. Hard to believe.
Well, tell us about Charlotte County. Who are these two mysterious fellows?
Well, we already know Patty Borthwick's running for the Liberals, and
Yes.
the Greens have they finished nomination for their candidate. I have an idea of who it is.
I don't think so.
Don't think they've closed their nomination yet.
No.
Anyway, so they're still electing somebody. So this isn't our normal candidate coverage. But in the last election, the People's Alliance got 10% of the vote. The Greens got 10% of the vote. The Liberals got 10% of the vote, and Andrea Mason took the rest. So it was a three-way tie for second place, really, in Charlotte County. And now the successors, and of course anybody who knows St. George and that area, who some of these PC leaders are, Sharon Thompson and the Hats, and and you go back some of the Lees, like Sheldon Lee, who used to be an MLA there, and there's some gatekeeping around these parties for sure, Richard Doucette and all these stuff. So the Liberals don't have a strong candidate in Patty Borthwick. People do know her. She doesn't have a political career behind her. She's never been in sort of like a town council or anything like that. But now we're looking at who's going to replace Andrea. And the two names that we have right now are Ian Lee and David Hatt. And Mr. Lee, Ian Lee, taught me in school, and David Hatt's my cousin. So it's an interesting dynamic. I don't understand why Ian Lee is considering. He's a St. Stephen Lee. He's not been politically active. I'm sure he's always been conservative. He is certainly religious. When I was deeply involved with the church, the Lee family and his wife and everybody were very involved at the church in St. George and whatnot at St. Mark's Anglican. And listen, no shade on them. Like, I always thought they were wonderful people and really intelligent. Mr. Lee has 3 degrees, right? Like he went overseas, he crossed the pond, and has a master's degree as well as 2 bachelor's degrees, and like very intelligent man, amazing musician. And I was shocked to see his name in the running. The only thing I can think, and I believe that Sharon is responsible, former Mayor of St. George, is responsible for recruiting her. Him. She's responsible for recruiting him. The only thing I can think is that Ian, sees some of the preference around religious candidates and finds some comfort there. 18 has a bit of a connection down home in St. George. I don't think she's ever been there, but there are people who have followed her. I know for sure. I was one of them. And I knew who they were, right? So I wonder if that's not it. Now, David Hatt, he's a councillor at the new municipality in St. George, Fundy region.
He's your cousin?
Yeah, he's a cousin. It's like a third cousin, I think. He's a fisherman. He's in politics. He knows how to talk. I don't know how this is going to play out, to be honest. It's hard to see. If they get Ian, he'll be the most intelligent and capable candidate they've gotten, from what I can see. From 3 degrees Ian Lee to no degrees Fatine, it's a pretty stark difference in candidate choice, or so not that degrees matter, but it's it doesn't keep with the normal conservative candidate. So I mean, good for them, and I do think Ian would be a good member of the legislature, honorable. He would be honest. He would not sell out. He would, be speaking more of that moral language that the Charlotte County Bible Belt speaks. But David Hatt, he's a bit more of a politician, a little more of a practitioner in this already. He's, in council.
Runs in the family.
Yeah. So anyway, there you have it. That's Charlotte County.
Okay. Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see some of these nomination runoffs in the next couple of months. It's a hard time to be hitting the streets to get people off their ATVs and off their boats and off the lake to, show up to a nomination
Well,
meeting.
Speaking of ATVs, David Hatt is, part of the ATV club down there and runs that kind of in that wagon, that Mike Holland camp, if you will.
Well, it's like, again, it's a huge part of New Brunswick. It is who we are on very many levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons we're kind of disappointed that the Conservatives have melted down so much, is that, you do actually represent a fair chunk of people with the particular views and types, that you hold. And they're just, it can't just be all of you. That's all. It can't just be all the rich white men. It can't just be all the ATV enthusiasts. There are a significant number of us types as well, or my types, your types, etc. That also deserve representation up there. And I think that's, again, why we're trying to advocate for more of a balanced legislature than has currently existed.
Yeah, a more representative one, ideally, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us about who's going to slay the blue dragon here.
Oh my gosh. Yes, Aaron Kennedy. So I just popped over to his LinkedIn and we have quite a resume. Currently is the acting chief administrative officer of the town of Quispamsis, and has been the communications manager there for 10 years previous to that. Currently on the board of Envision. It also says he was a television host on Rogers TV. So must have had a show on here for a while. And then during Sean Graham's government, he was the executive assistant to Mary Schreier, who is currently on council in the town of Quispamsis. So you kind of see this map of Aaron's former and current reality. So he had quite a big showing to his nomination last night or the night before out in the valley. So, but again, it's like, if we had this experience during the by-election with the Liberal candidate choices, and it's like, oh yeah, no, these ones were all in the network, already like kind of seasoned, ready to rock and roll. Politics is their game.
Yeah. I mean, again, like we said at the start, this looks like a legacy Liberal.
Yeah.
And especially one who's been in this many positions of power. It's like, man, the Liberals just love power, don't they?
They sure do. Someone said recently, actually, well, we actually had a lovely lunch with Elizabeth May. That's another thing that happened this week, where we got to meet up with her, the leader of the Federal Greens in St. John at Vegelution. And according to, the green lore, there's an entire page in the Liberal sort of handbook about destroying Greens.
Taking their candidates.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just a lot of it just is one of these things where the Green Party is seen as a significant threat to their power. Once again, no one's trying to say that, that's the name of the game. You're trying to win. But it's the shady, snaky, duplicitous, built-in way that it's done that I think really turns people off. And it's something I could never get behind as a person, to involve myself with such shenanigans, to even be perceived as somebody who would accept that.
But that's how you win.
I'm sorry, but if anything's ever going to actually change, not just be a change tour. If anything's actually going to change, you have to do things differently. You can't just keep being creeps
with the same people,
and working with the same people, and only allowing folks from the inside to get in, and if they don't follow your bizarre set of rules, then they're considered, not one of you. So I'm extremely disappointed in hearing all the things I'm hearing and seeing all the things I'm seeing with this, the liberal side of things. And I'm probably going to get in trouble with Sean too. But
we're not going to get in trouble with Sean. Sean, we respect Sean. He respects us. I know that. He's not going to, he's not going to take us out back or something like that. But but
I just feel like I've gotten
with us on a number of things.
He does. And I think I've gotten in trouble with people significantly for holding this view.
Yeah.
And seen as just somebody who's like putting on something, but I've my whole life and being involved in activism and politics and everything has led, as if it's show me anything. It's like, if you see it enough times, you have to believe it. And just because somebody says something doesn't mean it's true. Oh, they're great. They're super nice. Like this and that. It's like, okay, fine. But like, how does that show up in, how they talk about things and what they're proposing and how they're backing things up? Because taking people at their surface level it's just really not gotten me anywhere personally.
No, it's good. It's a good one. I think we know that people out there who, I saw a post the other day from somebody that said, look, there's a center. No, it was Luke Randall who put this out. There's 3 parties running on the left, and there's 1 party consolidated on the right. Well, okay, let's be clear here. 1, the left-right divide conversation isn't genuine. It's not real. It's fictitious. I'll fight you on that. Left-right divide is a jargon term used by people to describe in blanket kind of terms people's dispositions and who they'll vote for. It's not real. There is no left-wing party and right-wing party. Each party has a weird combination of positions. In some cases, they are at odds. They are schizophrenic in some ways about what they believe and policies they hold. Duplicitous is the word I think you used, and it's a good one. And that's because the people that make them up, they're big tent, especially the liberals and the conservatives, they're big tent parties, right? And so in that, when you have big tent parties, the most important thing is who's in control, right? And, unfortunately, like you say, the biggest change we need to see is the empowerment of the local community to restore faith in your democracy, to engage people and participate and do more than the bare minimum. That's what's going to solve our problems. That's what's going to change the province. It isn't what beautiful new policy are you going to put in from Fredericton to change the healthcare system. It's, are you going to see people choosing to make the healthcare system their own, to go and volunteer at their hospitals, to go and support their hospitals and fundraise with their hospitals and get on boards and help and put their kids in school for it, like all that. Like that's what's going to happen here, and that's what's going to change the healthcare system. But that's not what we're seeing in those big tent parties. We're seeing a lot of command and control style politics, and with people who, in the liberal case, look like they're just willing to fall in line, and the conservatives, no, they're not willing to fall in line. They're going to leave the party. So that's what we're seeing. And, we got to get beyond that. And this idea that we're splitting the vote and there, we got to be worried about Higgs gaining power. I'm sorry. I'd rather everybody show up, vote their gut, vote their beliefs and values, and end up with Higgs as the premier again to see where the chips actually fall. Right. It's such a cowardly position to take. And also, like, we don't know what's happening with the People's Alliance. There isn't one party on the right, right? No. There isn't. There's the conservatives, no. and that divide is different anyway. They're not on the right. There's also this libertarian spectrum. There's also, an economic spectrum. There's a social spectrum. The economic spectrum
is more like what I think that matters more is who favors the few and who favors the many. And unfortunately, I think both Liberals and PCs favor the few in their policy decisions.
But the Liberals certainly do in their candidate selection.
Well, I mean, Bob Jones' latest article about NB Power is about how it is forbidden to give tax rebates and, NB Power exemptions, etc., to anyone but big industry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a regular ratepayer, it is categorically forbidden for there to be any discounts, etc. So who's been in charge of NB Power since its inception? Either Liberals or Conservatives. So you cannot say that the Liberals have been out there looking out for the little guy. There's no proof of it. Show me the proof from the Gallant government, from the Graham government, from the McKenna government before that.
Yeah, like this is where the conversation stopped on Twitter, and they all ran away and they all wouldn't talk anymore, really. Like Dawn and these other folks who were on there. It's like, oh, well, if David, I don't, David's intentions and who knows and all this stuff. It's like, wait a minute. The Greens don't have to be accountable to what the Liberals do. The Greens don't have a track record of being in government. I wouldn't hold somebody who's never driven a car to be accountable for, or to have the same sort of weight in expectation as somebody who's been driving for 30 years. But if the person who's been driving for 30 years has gotten in 4 accidents, has been caught texting and driving, has been negligent in their practice to be a safe and good driver, I'm going to pick the first-time driver. Thank you very much. And that's the analogy that really is what's at stake here. Is are we willing to hold a party that's an alternative to the Higgs government, yes, accountable for the mess we're in as well? And we got to see some contrition by the Liberals in order to do that, and they won't give us any.
And it's so true, and we would need, yes, contrition, admitting that there has been problems with your party in the past. That you've made mistakes. You are willing to own them. You are willing to course correct them. But I don't see any proof of any of this. So until I do, I am firm in my beliefs that there has to be an intentional critic of both of these parties, and that is the third party. That is the Greens.
And that's our podcast.
So I have to jump on.
Yeah, me too. I gotta go.
We have jobs, which is so fun. But this has been a lovely
chat.
Weeks.
Hoping we can get Andrea next week. Thank you to everybody for listening. And we're not taking a break for summer yet, but my gosh, at some point we need one. And because there's barbecues to have and things to do.
You gotta go to Magic Mountain.
I know. Let's go to Magic Mountain. All right. Peace out, guys. Have a good week.